Welcome to Translano. Hey, there. I'm so glad you're here. This is a space where we celebrate self-expression, individuality, and empowerment. I was the kind of child adults described as easy. I lined up my shoes by the door without being asked. I kept my hands to myself. I said please and thank you with the careful precision of someone who sensed that approval was a kind of oxygen, and that I should not waste it. If you had met me at 8, you would have thought my life was simple. But even then, there was a private geography inside me that I didn't have words for. I can still picture the hallway in our old house, the one that smelled faintly of laundry soap and the lemon cleaner my mother used on Saturdays. At the end of that hallway was my parents' bedroom. I knew which floorboards creaked. I knew how to turn the doorknob so it wouldn't click. I knew where my mother kept the things that looked soft and bright and, in some inexplicable way, like home. I didn't think of it as rebellion. I didn't think of it as a secret identity. I thought of it the way a thirsty person thinks of water. Some afternoons, when I was alone, I would open the drawer and touch the fabric with the tips of my fingers, like I was checking whether something was real. Sometimes I would hold a blouse up against my chest and look down, not because I wanted to trick anyone, but because my body felt like it was missing a shape it was supposed to have. If I'm being honest, it didn't even feel like pretending. It felt like remembering. The first time I actually put something on, it was a simple skirt, nothing dramatic. I stepped into it carefully, as if stepping wrong would break some invisible rule that held the world together. I pulled it up and smoothed it over my hips, and then I just stood there. I wasn't aroused. I wasn't performing. I was quieter. The noise in my head lowered, like someone had turned down a radio that had been blaring in another room. When I look back now, that's what I recognize most clearly, not the clothing itself, but the relief. The feeling that, for a few minutes I could breathe without bracing for impact. Of course, relief doesn't make you brave. It makes you careful, because you start to understand what you could lose. I grew up in a family that valued order the way some families value music. My father believed in straight lines, straight posture, straight answers, straight priorities. He wasn't cruel, not in the simple way people imagine cruelty. He was dependable. He worked hard. He fixed things around the house. He took pride in being the kind of man who didn't need help, and he wanted me to inherit that self-sufficiency like it was a birthright. My mother was warmer, but her warmth came with rules. She was the kind of person who could sense what the neighbors thought before the neighbors said it. She kept our life polished, not out of vanity, but out of a quiet terror of being judged and found lacking. If my father was a wall, my mother was a window, transparent enough to let in light, but always aware of what was looking in. So I learned early that certain things were safe to share and other things were not. I learned to bring home good grades and jokes and stories about friends. I learned to hide the strange ache I felt when I watched girls at school braid each other's hair, not because I wanted to date them, but because I wanted to be inside the circle of that softness. I learned to laugh when boys made jokes about sissies, because laughing was easier than standing still and letting my face betray me. By middle school, the world started sorting us more aggressively. The boys' locker room was a loud, metallic place of slamming doors and crude humor, and it felt like being trapped inside a rulebook written in a language I didn't speak. I tried to learn it anyway. I lowered my voice. I forced myself to walk with heavier steps. I watched how other boys held their shoulders, how they made eye contact like it was a contest. I practiced anger because it seemed like the most acceptable emotion for a boy to have. At night, when everyone slept, I would sometimes stand in the bathroom and look at myself in the mirror. I would tilt my head, soften my mouth, raise my eyebrows the way I'd seen women do when they were listening. I wasn't trying to act like a woman for attention. I was trying to find a version of my face that didn't feel like a mask. I didn't know the difference then between gender identity and gender expression. I didn't know there were words like transgender, gender nonconforming, gender dysphoria, non-binary. I just knew that my inner life didn't match the role people handed me, and that mismatch made me feel guilty, as if I'd been given a good life and was somehow ungrateful for not fitting it properly. When I finally started reading about it years later, it helped me understand that gender identity and gender expression can be complex, and that being different from expectations is not, by itself, a disorder or a moral failure. https
Ugh.
www.apa.org/topics/LGBTQ/transgender people gender identity gender expression. But back then, my world was smaller. In my world, boys were supposed to want to be men in the specific way my father defined manhood: sturdy, stoic, uninterested in girly things, proud of discomfort like it was proof of character. So I tried. I joined sports I didn't like. I laughed at jokes I didn't understand. I forced myself into a version of masculinity that felt like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small, possible, if you ignored the pain long enough, but it made you limp in ways other people noticed. The first time I was caught was not dramatic. There was no screaming, no cinematic confrontation. My mother found a pair of tights in the laundry. She held them up like evidence. Her face did something I had never seen before, not anger exactly, but a kind of frightened disgust, like she had reached into the washing machine and pulled out a snake. "What is this?" she asked. I remember the way my mouth went dry. I remember thinking, irrationally, that if I could just pick the right words, I could rewind time. I don't know, I lied, and it was a terrible lie because it insulted her intelligence and mine. She didn't yell. She sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the tights as if they were a riddle. Then she asked questions in a voice that tried to stay calm and failed. "Where did you get them? Why were they in your room? Is someone doing something to you?" That last question, the fear underneath it, made my stomach twist. She was scanning for an outside villain because the alternative, that the impulse came from inside me, was too unsettling. Part of me wanted to give her the villain. It would have been easier for both of us if I could have said someone dared me, someone tricked me, someone made me. But the truth didn't fit into a neat explanation. So I said almost nothing. I cried without wanting to. My body betrayed me with shaking and tears, and I hated myself for it, because I'd been trained to believe tears were a kind of weakness. When my father came home, my mother told him in a voice that sounded like she was reporting a death. He looked at me for a long time, then asked one question that landed like a punch. "Are you gay?" It's strange how memory works. I don't remember what I answered. I remember the shame, hot and dizzying, and the frustration of not having language precise enough to explain what was happening inside me. Even now, I'm careful with this part because I don't want to collapse everything into one story. My sexuality and my gender were not the same problem, even if they got tangled up in my family's fear. The point is that I didn't fit their expectations, and their expectations were treated like laws of physics. My father decided, silently at first and then aloud, that this was something to be corrected. He didn't say unnatural to my face, but the word lived in the air between us. My mother cried in the laundry room when she thought I couldn't hear. They started watching me in small ways, checking what websites I visited, making comments about the way I stood, the way I crossed my legs, the way I chose hoodies that were too fitted. My home became a place where I monitored every movement. That's when the fear really began. Not fear of being teased at school, I already knew how to survive that by blending in. This was fear of being misunderstood by the people who were supposed to love me without conditions. I did what a lot of kids do when their family becomes unsafe. I became a good actor. I told them what they wanted to hear. I cut my hair shorter. I lowered my voice even more. I tried to date a girl because I thought it would calm them down, and it did, a little, but it also made me feel like I was disappearing while everyone applauded. The disappearing didn't happen all at once. It happened in tiny daily surrenders. Each time I swallowed a truth, I got a little better at swallowing. Each time I denied myself something harmless, painting my nails clear, buying a softer shirt, letting my hands move the way they wanted, I became a little less real. The worst part was that the world rewarded this unreality. Teachers praised my maturity. My father looked relieved. My mother started sleeping through the night again. And I started feeling, for the first time, the quiet heaviness that people later called depression. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't lie in bed all day. I went to school. I smiled at the right moments. But I felt like I was living behind glass, watching my own life happen to someone else. Sometimes, in the shower, I would press my hands against my chest and imagine a different body there, and the grief would come so suddenly I'd have to bite my lip to keep from making noise. When I eventually read clinical explanations, I recognized myself in descriptions of distress that can come from a mismatch between one's experienced gender and assigned sex, and in the idea that support should aim to help people live in ways that reduce distress rather than forcing them into a role that increases it. https /www.nhs.uk/conditions/gender-dysphoria/. But in my family, distress was interpreted as stubbornness. My parents believed that if they applied enough pressure, the phase would end. The summer I turned 16, my father came home with a brochure. It looked official, a logo, a motto about building inner strength, photos of boys hiking, lifting, chopping wood. The words were full of the kind of masculine poetry adults use when they don't want to admit they're afraid: discipline, resilience, integrity, brotherhood. "It'll be good for you," he said. "Get you out of your head." My mother hovered behind him, holding her hands together as if praying. I remember the moment I understood I didn't have a vote. I could argue, but it wouldn't matter. In their minds, they were saving me from something. The tragedy is that they thought love meant intervention, and intervention meant control. I didn't know then that the camp director was an old college friend of my mother's. I didn't know there was a history there, a friendship that had faded, a shared experience in a women's studies class my mother had never mentioned, a private regret my mother carried about the ways she'd let fear decide her choices. I didn't know that my mother, panicking and ashamed, had reached out to someone she remembered as strong, in a different way, not physically, but emotionally. I only knew I was being sent away. The drive there felt like a funeral procession. My father talked about how this would straighten me out, how I'd thank him later. My mother kept looking at me like she wanted to apologize but didn't know how. When we arrived, the place looked exactly like the brochure. A rustic gate, a main lodge with wood beams, a flagpole, boys in matching shirts carrying duffel bags. The air smelled like pine and sun-baked dirt. My father's shoulders loosened, as if the environment itself was proof he was right. The director met us by the steps. He was in his 40s, fit but not exaggeratedly muscular, with calm eyes that didn't scan me like a problem to be solved. He shook my father's hand firmly. He hugged my mother with a familiarity that startled me, though my mother acted like it was normal. "Good to see you," he said to her, and there was something in his tone, warmth, but also gravity, like two people acknowledging a difficult thing without naming it. Then he turned to me and said, quietly, "You must be exhausted. Not, you must be excited, not, you must be ready to become a man, but exhausted." It was the first time an adult had described my inner state accurately, and it made my throat tighten. My parents left. My mother kissed my cheek too quickly. My father clapped my shoulder with forced confidence. Then their car disappeared down the gravel road, and I stood there with my duffel bag and the feeling that I'd been dropped into a machine designed to grind something out of me. The first few days did not reassure me. The schedule was strict: early wake-ups, cold showers, physical training, chores. There were lectures about responsibility and earning respect. The boys around me tried to outdo each other in toughness. Some of them were there for reasons I could guess: trouble at school, anger issues, parents who wanted them fixed in various ways. The culture felt like an amplified version of everything that had suffocated me at home. I began to plan how to survive. Keep my head down. Follow rules. Avoid attention. Wait for the weeks to pass. But then something strange happened. During one lecture, the director, his name was Daniel, started talking about strength. I expected him to define it as dominance or emotional numbness. Instead, he said strength was the ability to face reality without flinching, including the reality inside yourself. He said the most common form of weakness was pretending you didn't feel what you felt and then letting that denial leak out as cruelty. A boy in the front row scoffed. Daniel didn't punish him. He asked, "What are you afraid will happen if you admit you're scared?" The room went quiet in a way that felt dangerous. That night, Daniel asked to speak with me alone. My stomach dropped as I followed him to a small office behind the lodge. On the wall were books, psychology, memoirs, history, more than I expected in a place that advertised itself with axes and mountains. He offered me water. Then he said, "I know why you're here." I stiffened, waiting for condemnation. He continued, "I also know your parents think they're doing the right thing. And I know you might think I'm part of a plan to change you." I didn't answer. I was afraid that if I spoke, I would break. Daniel leaned forward slightly, not intimidating, just attentive. "I'm going to say something very clearly," he said. "No one here is going to try to force you into an identity. Not masculine, not feminine, not anything. What we will do is give you a structure to tell the truth safely. That might disappoint your parents. It might disappoint you. But it will be yours." I stared at him, suspicious. Adults didn't say things like that in my life. Adults wanted outcomes. How? I managed. He paused, choosing words carefully. "Your mother and I, we knew each other a long time ago. She called me in fear. She used the language she has, she said she wanted you fixed. But what I heard was a mother terrified of losing her child, even if she doesn't understand what she's losing them to." I felt anger flare. "So she sent me here to, what, be tricked?" Daniel didn't defend her. That mattered. She agreed to a program she could accept, he said. She needed it to look like something familiar, discipline, tradition, toughness. That's the wrapper. Inside, it's different. It's counseling, emotional skills, and, if you choose, exploration of how you want to live. The ethical problem hit me. My mother had deceived my father, and maybe herself, to get me here. Part of me felt betrayed. Another part felt a small, aching gratitude that she had reached for help instead of harsher punishment. I didn't know what to do with both feelings at once. Daniel went on. "There is a kind of so-called therapy that tries to change who someone is, sexual orientation, gender identity, expression. Major professional organizations have warned that those efforts are ineffective and can be harmful. I won't be part of that. https. /www.apa.org/topics/LGBTQ/evidence against conversion therapy https. /www.psychiatry.org/get attachment/3D23F2F414974537B4D-Fa322F761BF/position-conversion-therapy.pdf. He let that settle. Then he asked me a question that felt almost unbearably simple. "What do you want?" I didn't know how to answer. Wanting had become dangerous. Wanting had become the thing that got me punished, monitored, sent away. My mind searched for a safe response. I want to go home, I want my parents to stop fighting, I want to be normal. But underneath those rehearsed wants was something quieter and more honest. I wanted to stop lying. I wanted to stop feeling like my life was a performance review. I wanted to look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. I whispered, "I don't know." Daniel nodded as if that was an acceptable starting point. "Then we'll begin there," he said. The next weeks were not a magical transformation. They were work, and the work was not glamorous. It was journaling when I'd rather disappear. It was learning to name emotions with words instead of swallowing them until they became nausea. It was sitting in group circles where boys admitted things they'd never said out loud, that they were terrified of disappointing their fathers, that they felt wrong in their bodies, that they had been hurt and didn't know how to speak about it, that they'd used anger to keep people from noticing they were lonely. The physical training stayed, but it shifted in meaning. It wasn't about becoming more of a man. It was about learning what it felt like to keep a promise to yourself. We ran, not to punish our bodies, but to experience effort without self-hatred. We lifted weights while practicing breathing through discomfort instead of panicking. Daniel talked about the nervous system like it was a tool we could learn to use rather than a verdict on our character. Then came what he called immersion, and it's important that I describe this carefully because people misunderstand that word. It wasn't coercion. It wasn't humiliation. It wasn't anyone forcing me into women's clothing or insisting I become something. It was the opposite. it was a structured way to reduce fear by giving me controlled opportunities to be honest and then noticing that the world did not end. The first step was private. Daniel asked me, in a session with a licensed counselor who visited twice a week, to describe what I felt when I thought about clothing. Not what I did. What I felt. I talked about relief. I talked about shame. I talked about how I didn't want to be stared at, I wanted to be invisible and free at the same time, which is a contradiction that only makes sense if you've spent years hiding. The counselor asked, if clothing is expression, what are you trying to express? I didn't have a poetic answer. I said, me. They didn't clap. They didn't celebrate. They wrote it down like it mattered. The next step was choice. Daniel unlocked a small storage room that looked like an ordinary supply closet from the outside. Inside were donated clothes of all kinds, men's, women's, neutral, different sizes, different styles. There was also a box of toiletries, simple makeup, hair ties, plain nail polish. It wasn't a costume shop. It was more like a quiet library where you could check out possibilities without being mocked. No one has to use this, Daniel said. No one is required. If you do, you decide what, when, and how. And we will talk about what it brings up. My hands shook as I reached for a soft sweater that could have been anyone's. I held it against my chest, and the old relief rose so fast it almost hurt. That night, I wore the sweater alone in my bunk, under my camp hoodie, like a secret layer of truth against my skin. I cried silently, not because it was sad, but because it was the first time in years I had allowed myself something without immediately punishing myself for it. Over time, the immersion expanded. It included practicing how to respond to discomfort without collapsing, how to walk into a room and keep breathing even if you feared judgment. It included role-playing conversations, how to tell someone this is part of who I am without apologizing, how to set boundaries, how to leave a situation that became unsafe. It included talking about the difference between identity and stereotypes, about how femininity isn't weakness and masculinity isn't cruelty, and that a healthy life usually involves integrating traits people falsely label as belonging to only one gender: tenderness, courage, patience, assertiveness. The suspense in those weeks came from my own choices. Each step forward made going back harder. Each truth I admitted made my old performance feel more impossible to resume. I started to understand that my parents could not be made comfortable without me being made invisible, and that bargain had a cost I was no longer sure I could pay. Halfway through the program, Daniel asked me whether I wanted to try being addressed differently in a limited setting, different name, different pronouns, just within counseling sessions, just as an experiment in honesty. He framed it as data, not destiny. I said yes, and even then my yes felt like stepping off a cliff. When the counselor used the name I chose, something in me unclenched. Not everything. I was still anxious, still scared, still uncertain. But the sound of that name felt like a hand finding mine in the dark. That's when the real ethical tension sharpened. It wasn't about whether I was allowed to be feminine. It was about whether I could accept the consequences of being real. I could imagine my father's face tightening, my mother's tears, the possibility of losing them. I could imagine school, the whispers, the questions. I could imagine the loneliness of living truthfully in a world that often punishes difference. But I could also imagine something else, something I'd barely let myself hope for, waking up and not immediately scanning the day for threats. Wearing clothes without feeling like I was committing a crime. Speaking without rehearsing. Building a life where I wasn't constantly trying to earn the right to exist. In the last week, Daniel said something that I still carry with me. He said, "You don't owe anyone a version of you that makes them comfortable if it makes you disappear. But you also don't get to punish them for being afraid. Your job is to be honest and responsible. Their job is to decide what they do with that honesty." I asked, "What if they can't handle it?" He answered, "Then you grieve what they can't give you, and you build support elsewhere. You don't destroy yourself to protect their denial." Later, when I found resources for families, I saw that this idea, support, education, connection, wasn't just Daniel's philosophy. There are organizations built around helping families move from fear to understanding, and helping parents support their children's gender expression and identity with love rather than control. I wish my parents had found that sooner. https /flag.org/resource/ourchildren/ The day my parents came to pick me up, I felt like I was walking toward a verdict. My duffel bag was packed. I had slept badly for 3 nights, trapped in cycles of anticipation and dread. Part of me wanted to run back into the woods and live among the trees where no one would name me. Daniel met me early that morning. He didn't tell me what to do. He asked what I wanted to wear. I stood in front of the closet room and stared at the options. My mind flashed through scenarios: my father's anger, my mother's shame, the car ride home, the long winter that could follow. Then I thought of the boy who used to sneak into a bedroom drawer just to feel fabric. I thought of the quiet relief. I thought of how small and exhausted my life had become when I tried to be what other people demanded. I chose clothes that were simple and honest, jeans that fit me the way I wanted, a plain top that wasn't overtly masculine, a soft cardigan, hair brushed differently than usual. I didn't try to look like a perfect anything. I tried to look like me on a day when I wasn't hiding. The phrase, perfect daughter, is something I've heard people say later, like a punchline or a twist. It wasn't like that. My eyeliner wasn't symmetrical. My hands were shaking. My voice cracked when I practiced saying hello. I was terrified. If there was anything perfect about that moment, it was only the clarity of it. I could either step forward as myself, imperfect and real, or I could step backward into the performance that was slowly killing me. When my parents' car pulled up, my father got out first. He scanned the grounds like he was looking for his son. My mother stepped out more slowly, eyes already wet. I walked toward them. My father's face changed in stages, confusion, then recognition, then something like betrayal. His jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. "What is this?" he demanded, and his voice rose on the last word like a siren. My mother covered her mouth. She looked at me the way she had looked at the tights in the laundry, like evidence, like danger. Then, to my shock, she whispered my chosen name. Not loudly. Not confidently. But she said it, as if testing whether it would burn her tongue. My throat tightened. "Hi," I said. My voice sounded thin, but it was mine. My father turned to Daniel, who had walked out to stand a few feet away, giving us space, but not abandoning me. "You did this," my father said. Daniel didn't flinch. "No," he said calmly. "I didn't do this. I helped your child tell the truth." My father pointed at me, as if pointing could force reality back into place. "This isn't strength. This is you indulging." He couldn't finish. He didn't have language beyond disgust, and even disgust was cracking under the strain. I surprised myself by speaking. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just clearly. "I need you to listen," I said. "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm not doing this to embarrass you. I'm doing this because I can't keep living like I'm lying every day." My father's eyes narrowed. "So you're choosing this?" The old trap was there. If I said yes, he would accuse me of rebellion. If I said no, he would accuse me of manipulation. I remembered Daniel's words about responsibility and honesty. "I'm choosing to be honest," I said. "I didn't choose to feel this way. I tried not to. I tried to be what you wanted. It made me feel like I wasn't going to survive." My mother made a sound, half sob, half gasp. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, and the question was full of guilt. I wanted to scream, because the answer was obvious, because you were scary. Because love felt conditional. Because you treated my truth like a disease. Instead, I said, I was afraid. My father's anger shifted, briefly, into fear. I saw it in the way his eyes darted to my mother when I said I wasn't going to survive. Parents are complicated. Even the ones who hurt you often believe they're protecting you, and when you name the harm, they panic because it means their protection was poison. The ride home was long. My father drove as if speed could erase what he'd seen. My mother sat in the back with me, close but not touching, like she wanted to but didn't know if she had the right. At one point, she whispered, "Daniel said you've been struggling." "Yes," I said. "What do you need?" she asked. That question was the beginning of everything, not because it solved anything, but because it admitted I had needs that mattered. I told her, quietly, that I needed space to figure out who I was without being punished for it. I told her I wanted to talk to a therapist who understood gender and anxiety. I told her I needed them to stop searching for ways to fix me and start searching for ways to know me. My father didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, tightly, "So what am I supposed to call you?" I stared at the back of his head. The old me would have apologized, offered compromises, tried to make it easier for him. The newer me, still shaky but steadier, chose honesty without cruelty. "You can call me by my name," I said. "Or you can call me your child. But please don't call me a mistake." The weeks after we got home were not a victory lap. They were a reckoning. My father moved through the house like someone avoiding a bomb. He would look at me and then look away, as if looking too long would make his world fall apart. My mother tried, clumsily, to help. She bought me a neutral-colored sweater, asked if I wanted to go shopping, then panicked and returned it unopened. She apologized in fragments. Sometimes she asked me questions that sounded like bargaining. "Could you just do this at home? Could you wait until you're older? Could you not tell your grandparents?" I had to learn a hard lesson: love and fear can live in the same person at the same time. My parents loved me, but their love had been trained by shame. Shame is a powerful inheritance. It teaches people to value appearances over truth, to prioritize social acceptance over private well-being. My mother wasn't a villain. She was someone who had been taught to survive by blending in, and now her child was refusing to blend. My father's struggle was different. He had built his identity on being a certain kind of man, and he saw my difference as a verdict on him. If his son wasn't a masculine, what did that say about his fatherhood? He wasn't just afraid for me, he was afraid of what people would think of him. The counselor I started seeing, outside the camp, in our town, helped me separate what was mine from what wasn't. My identity was mine. My parents' shame was theirs. Their reactions were not proof that I was wrong. They were proof that they were unprepared. I also had to learn that I was responsible for how I handled my truth. I couldn't lash out and call them monsters every time they stumbled. I couldn't demand instant fluency. I could demand respect. I could set boundaries. I could protect myself. But I also had to accept that growth takes time, and that sometimes people need education and support to move past fear. I remember the day I found an article explaining that conversion therapy isn't just ineffective, it's associated with harm. Reading that felt like someone turning on a light in a room where I'd been blamed for the darkness. It helped me articulate something to my parents: the goal shouldn't be changing who I am, but helping me live safely and with less distress. https ugh/www.apa.org/topics/LGBTQ/evidence against conversion therapy. I didn't show them the link as a weapon. I showed it as a bridge. "If you're scared," I told my mother, "please read this. Not to prove you wrong. To help you understand what helps and what hurts." She read it in the living room with her glasses on, lips pressed together. When she finished, she didn't immediately become enlightened. But she looked at me with a new kind of seriousness. "I thought we were saving you," she said. "I know," I answered. "But I need you to save me from loneliness, not from myself." High school became a test of resilience. I didn't come out to everyone at once. I made choices based on safety. Some days I presented more masculine because it was easier. Some days I let myself be softer. I learned that self-acceptance isn't a single dramatic declaration, it's 1,000 small decisions to stop abandoning yourself. I lost friends. Not in an explosive way. They just drifted, uncomfortable, confused, unwilling to complicate their social life with my complexity. I also gained surprising allies, a teacher who corrected someone gently when they mocked me, a girl in my art class who offered me her nail polish without making a big deal of it, a quiet boy who admitted he'd always felt like he was acting too. The world was not uniformly cruel, but it was inconsistent, and that inconsistency kept me alert. My mental health improved slowly, not because the world became kind, but because I stopped treating myself like an enemy. I learned coping strategies that were boring and effective, breathing exercises, sleep routines, writing down catastrophic thoughts and challenging them, reaching out before I spiraled. I learned that resilience isn't toughness in the cinematic sense. It's the willingness to keep showing up for your own life even when you don't feel heroic. The biggest change, though, was internal. Over time, I began to understand that my relationship with femininity wasn't about clothes. Clothes were the easiest visible symbol, but the deeper truth was that I had been starving for permission to be gentle with myself. Femininity, in my case, meant allowing softness without shame, allowing beauty without guilt, allowing emotion without self-contempt. It also meant confronting the misogyny embedded in the way I'd been raised, the idea that anything associated with women was lesser. Part of my healing was realizing that my desire for feminine expression wasn't lesser, it was human. When college came, I left home with a complicated mix of relief and grief. My mother hugged me longer than she used to. My father hugged me stiffly, as if hugging might imply agreement with something he still couldn't fully name. But he also said, awkwardly, "Be safe," and the word safe sounded like a concession. He was beginning to understand that safety wasn't just physical, it was psychological. College gave me space, but space doesn't automatically create peace. The first semester, I swung between extremes. Some weeks I dressed in a way that felt openly feminine and walked across campus with my heart pounding, exhilarated and terrified. Other weeks I retreated into neutrality, exhausted by visibility. I tried different labels in my head, like trying on shoes, gender nonconforming, gender fluid, trans woman, just me. I didn't settle immediately, and that uncertainty didn't mean I was faking. It meant I was learning. There's a myth that identity is discovered like buried treasure, one sudden dig and there it is, gleaming and complete. My experience was more like learning a language. At first you know a few words, then you start forming sentences, then you realize you've been thinking in it without noticing. It takes repetition. It takes mistakes. It takes patience. I eventually realized that my most stable sense of self leaned toward womanhood, not as a costume or an aesthetic, but as an internal orientation, how I wanted to be seen, how I wanted to move through the world, how I wanted my life to feel when no one was watching. And even then, I didn't become a perfect daughter. I became a woman who still had fears, still had family scars, still had days when mirrors were complicated. I also became someone who could look back at that camp story and name what mattered. It wasn't that anyone conditioned me into femininity. That's not how identity works, and framing it that way can accidentally echo the logic of conversion efforts, the mistaken idea that people can be shaped into or out of an identity through pressure. What happened instead was that someone created a structured, safer environment where I could stop lying long enough to hear myself. Support didn't change me. It revealed me. That distinction is important, and it's supported by the broader guidance I later read. Affirming care and psychological support aim to reduce distress and help people live authentically, not to impose an identity. https /www.nhs.uk/conditions/gender-dysphoria/treatment/. The relationship with my parents continued to evolve in slow, uneven steps. My mother joined a parent support group after months of resisting it, and when she did, she cried the way people cry when they realize they've been carrying fear alone for years. She told me later, "I thought I was the only mother in the world whose child was different." Then she corrected herself, more firmly, whose child was brave. My father took longer. He didn't join groups. He didn't read everything I sent. But he started asking questions that weren't accusations. He asked how my classes were going. He asked whether I had friends. He asked whether anyone was treating me badly. Once, on the phone, he said my name correctly, then went silent as if surprised by his own mouth, then cleared his throat and kept talking. That moment meant more to me than any dramatic apology could have, because it showed change happening at the level of habit, not just intention. Years later, I visited home for a holiday. My mother had put a small basket of toiletries in the guest bathroom, nothing flashy, just thoughtful things she knew I liked. My father avoided commenting on my clothes, which might sound minor, but in our family it was revolutionary. It meant he was practicing the discipline of letting me be. At dinner, my uncle made a joke, one of those jokes that pretends to be harmless but is designed to test whether you'll accept humiliation. My father surprised everyone, including me, by saying, calmly, "We don't talk about her like that here." The room went quiet. My uncle rolled his eyes and changed the subject. My mother stared at her plate, blinking fast. I felt something warm and heavy in my chest, like grief and gratitude at the same time. After dinner, when I was washing dishes, my father came into the kitchen and stood beside me. "I didn't understand," he said, and his voice was rough. I thought if I pushed hard enough, it would go away. I didn't gloat. I didn't punish him with silence. I had learned that repair is a skill, and it requires participation. "I know," I said. "But I'm still here." He nodded once, like a man accepting a hard fact. "I'm trying," he said. "That's not a perfect ending. It's not cinematic. It's real. Repair usually is." Now, when I talk about identity exploration, especially anything involving clothing, I try to be careful and responsible, because I know how quickly people misunderstand. Cross-dressing, for some, is simply expression, creativity, comfort, play. For others, it's part of a deeper understanding of gender. For some, it has nothing to do with sexuality, and for others it intersects in complicated ways. The only universal truth I've found is that shame is a poor teacher. It doesn't create integrity. It creates secrecy. And secrecy is where people get hurt. I also try to emphasize something else: you can pursue authenticity without turning your life into a war. You can set boundaries without cruelty. You can acknowledge your parents' fear without letting it steer your existence. You can seek qualified mental health support not because you are broken, but because growing up under pressure leaves marks, and learning to live with self-respect is a skill like any other. If you are a parent hearing a story like mine and feeling panic rise in your throat, I want you to know that your fear is understandable, but it is not a map. Your child's honesty is not an attack on you. It is an invitation to know them. And there are resources designed to help families move from confusion to support without shame and without forcing outcomes. https://flag.org/resource/ourchildren/. If you are someone like I was, quiet, careful, watching your own hands as if they might betray you, I want you to know that self-acceptance doesn't require perfection. You don't have to become a symbol. You don't have to justify your existence with suffering. You don't have to earn the right to be yourself by proving how miserable you are. You can start with one honest sentence. You can start with one safe person. You can start by noticing what brings you relief and asking, gently, why. Sometimes people ask me what happened to that kid my parents tried to cure. The truth is he didn't disappear. He grew. He learned that strength isn't the absence of softness. It's the ability to carry softness without shame. It's the courage to face the parts of yourself you were taught to fear and to build a life where those parts don't have to hide. And if there's one thing I wish I could go back and tell my younger self in that hallway, fingertip on fabric, heart pounding like a warning, it would be this: you are not unnatural for wanting to feel like yourself. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a person, and your life belongs to you. Thank you for watching and spending this time with me. If this story helped you understand yourself or others a little better, feel free to explore more on the channel.